Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Chel Squared. We are now at the 1 month mark of the show, which is incredible. Thank you so much for listening and for following along the show. I'm Andrew Chelney, your host, and we have a boatload of stuff to get into this week. A lot has gone down in the world of the NHL over the past week. We have Pacioretty reportedly by The Athletic being shopped by Montreal because they are not going to re-sign him, which is, oh boy, that's a whole can of worms. Max Pacioretty is a sensational player, a sensational winger to allegedly not be interested in re-signing him. I think it's a disgrace. We have a report, again by The Athletic, that Panarin is not interested in signing with the Blue Jackets long term, not because he doesn't like the team, but because he doesn't like playing in Columbus, which is a unique aspect to the whole Columbus team. Because right now, as it stands right now, they got bounced in the first round by Washington after winning the first 2 games. They didn't really get better, but they probably will make the playoffs if Panarin stays, but if he doesn't, who knows? We have Carey Price on the agenda. Carey Price is, no doubt about it, one of the greatest goaltenders of the generation for sure, of all time for sure. But is he's too good for the Montreal Canadiens? Is he too good? Because the Canadiens right now are abysmal. They're bad. There's no other way to put it. So, is it in Montreal's best interest to move Carey Price to somewhere else and rebuild properly? Because Carey Price is too good to let Montreal fall to the lowest rank in the standings. He's too good to let that happen, whether it's pride, whether it's skill. Carey Price is Carey Price. He had a down year. That's great, and that's dandy, but it's still Carey Price at the end of the day. He's not going to let Montreal fall for Hughes. And we also have the Chicago and Arizona trade with Marian Hossa. There's a lot to dissect in that trade. Arizona loves to be the team to take on that bad contract. You got Datsuk, you got Boland, you have Pronger, now you have Marian Hossa on top of that as well. And one of our last final topics that we're going to get into is which former UFA player besides John Tavares will fit in best with their new team, and who better to help me dissect these topics than the NHL.com fantasy connoisseur, the NHL Network star, the one, the only Mr. Pete Jensen. Pete, how are you?
Doing great, Andrew, and great job with the podcast, man. And excited to be a part of it, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on and giving me some of your time. I need your hot takes. I love your hot takes. I love reading your stuff, and when I reached out to you, I was very excited that you were interested in hopping on. I think you add a layer of knowledge that a lot of people just expect from you at this point because you're Pete. You're Pete. We know we get from Pete Jensen. So I really appreciate you coming on here and lending me some of your time. Now, what do you think about this athletic report, I should say, that the Canadiens have told Max Pacioretty they will not negotiate a contract extension and they will shop him? What do you think of that?
I mean, it's a shame. I mean, he's American-born player. It's a Canadian market. It's kind of been out there in terms of the fan base and just the whole thing that maybe that wouldn't be a fit moving forward. We all know that Pacioretty is the captain. He's a great goal scorer, as good as you can find out there. He's been 30 plus goals, with the exception of this past year where he was banged up, as was Carey Price, as was Shea Weber, who's still banged up and an injury concern moving forward. He's probably going to miss most of the season. So, yeah, this Montreal team is in really bad shape. The only worst team in the NHL may be Ottawa if they trade Erik Karlsson. And there are a lot of improved teams this offseason. So, to me, it's a shame that Max Pacioretty, if he is traded, would be traded by a team. Montreal a few years ago. I mean, you as a Ranger fan growing up, I mean, you know that this was a dangerous team. The year that the Rangers beat them to get to the Cup final, it was largely because of Carey Price. You know, not the fact that they won that series, not that they wouldn't have been able to beat them if he was healthy, but that was a huge blow to that team. Montreal was a feared team to go into that building. It's a shame to see them on the down right now. But yeah, Pacioretty could put a contending team over the top, no matter how you slice it around the league. There are a lot of teams that he could fit in well with. And yeah, being a member of this 2019 UFA class, potential UFAs, one that includes Tyler Seguin, Erik Karlsson, Blake Wheeler, so many guys out there, Wayne Simmons. Pacioretty's right up there. He's right up there with Seguin among the best goal scorers in that potential class. So it's a really interesting storyline, not only for real life fans, but also for fantasy owners, because you talk about if he lands in the right spot, he could be 35 and 40 goal scorer potentially, maybe his best year yet. So really excited to see where he might go. But from the Montreal standpoint, it's really it's tough news to take, I would think, for most Canadiens fans.
I'm really glad you mentioned Blake Wheeler, by the way. He scored 91 points in 81 regular season games last year. Career high. And he isn't being talked about as much as I would like, because I think Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler and Patrick Laine is probably one of the premier lines in the NHL period. And I think because it's Winnipeg, they aren't being talked about as much. But I mean, I'm glad you highlighted Blake Wheeler, because this guy is absolutely, one, incredible, two, one of the most underappreciated players in the league. Max Pacioretty's contract, one more year, only $4.5 million. So if Montreal were, evidently they are shopping him, as according to The Athletic, this is a cap-friendly contract, for this year anyway. What teams do you think, besides the obvious, besides probably a San Jose, that have been rumored to get Pacioretty since before the draft, they've been in talks? Maybe Toronto? What's a surprise team that could potentially go after Max Pacioretty?
I mean, a surprise team? There are a couple out there. I mean, looking at the list of teams right now, teams that I would think would love to add a player like him. I mean, Buffalo, even though it's in the same division, Buffalo is fairly weak on the wing, much improved this offseason. I mean, Boston is a team that, was in the market, in the running for Ilya Kovalchuk, in terms of, and they also met with John Tavares. So that's a team that I could see. Those are two teams both in the same division, so that might not happen. So let's say it doesn't go in the same division. I mean, teams like New Jersey would love to have him. Columbus, if they could figure out something. Panarin's not going to work out long term there potentially. So maybe if they could swing some sort of a crazy trade and then land him. Columbus is a team that we'll get to later that I think is a dark horse team to win it all, and that really makes it a really difficult situation for them because they're so close to breaking through. I feel like if they finally won a playoff series, they could win a couple of more and really make things interesting. But they're on the ropes right now with Panarin and Bobrovsky as 2019 UFAs. I mean, in terms of some other teams, Colorado maybe would be a dark horse surprise team to land him. Colorado's a very strong team. They've gotten even stronger in this offseason with adding Grubauer, adding Ian Cole to shore up their defense. So maybe Colorado's a dark horse. Chicago might be in play for him. Uh, they've freed up some cap space with this Hossa trade, so that maybe is an interesting wrinkle. And then some teams out west. I mean, certainly Vegas has some money to spend. They just lost Neil and Perron, so they would be a potential fit. You mentioned San Jose, so there's a lot of teams out there that would maybe take a chance on Pacioretty because of his low cap hit that you mentioned. I mean, there are teams that would take him that maybe wouldn't even care if they didn't extend him. I mean, not that they wouldn't care, but you can take that risk when you're very close to winning it all. And, teams like Vegas and Anaheim might be able to take that chance.
You mentioned Columbus. Now, this is not reported anywhere. I mean, this is just judging by contracts here. Would this be out of the question if in some universe, maybe this could happen, if Columbus and Montreal got together and said, okay, Montreal doesn't want Pacioretty, Columbus isn't sure Panarin resigns, how likely is a potential Panarin for Pacioretty, potentially plus, trade?
I mean, I would say probably unlikely just because if Panarin went the other way, he would be joining a team with no centers, with the outside, with the exception of Kotkaniemi, the draft pick, the bold pick that they took at number 3. I mean, I think that team is so weak that Panarin probably would. That's just my opinion. Panarin probably wouldn't be interested in signing long term. I mean, if he's not interested in signing long term with Columbus, a very competitive team. I know Montreal's a great hockey market, but I don't really see that happening. So I would say probably unlikely, but it would be very interesting. I mean, if one side got the other one to budge, and then potentially the other one could get an extension done. It's possible, but I would say probably unlikely.
Panarin scored 82 points in 81 games last year. He was a point-a-game player. Some people, including myself, I had doubts that Panarin would replicate his stats that he had in Chicago because I figured, okay, he's playing with Kane, he's playing with Taves, his numbers are inflated. But then he came to Columbus and he destroyed any doubt that not only destroyed, he put up career highs in assists and overall points. He's a solid player that showed the NHL that he's for real. Now, again, there are rumors flying around. None of them are confirmed, but potentially the Rangers could be a great fit for him. But again, the Rangers are looking at a 2-3 plus year rebuild. How likely is Panarin to stick around for those first couple of years in any rebuilding team to see long-term success and then potentially maybe a long playoff run?
Well, I think he's more than a solid player. I think with the points you made, I think he's an elite player, and he's only 26. He's been in the league a couple of years now, and yeah, just taking that next step, leaving Patrick Kane's wing was amazing. And remember, Columbus had Washington on the ropes in the playoffs. Panarin had 7 points in 6 games. He's settled any debate in terms of whether he's elite in my book. So yeah, I think that Panarin, being only 26, maybe if it's the right market, I'm not sure what he's looking for, but if he's looking for a big market like Montreal or the Rangers, potentially, I mean, he would speed up any rebuild, in my opinion. So I think that Panarin to the Rangers would be a really fun fit, even if it didn't work out in the first year or two. So I'm really interested to see where he goes. I mean, right now, for me, all the chips have moved into place around the league except for those couple of key guys that could be traded. It's Erik Karlsson, Max Pacioretty, and Artemi Panarin. So to me, the dust hasn't settled. We can't quite enjoy our summer just yet. We need to see where these guys go.
Right. Do you think they'll Pacioretty probably get moved. Panarin, probably more details on that as soon as Carlson moves or that situation gets resolved.
I mean, I'm not sure what's taking so long for the Eric Carlson thing, honestly. I mean, if they've learned anything from the Tavares thing, you have to get as much as you can while you can before it's too late and not take the risk if you don't think a guy's going to re-sign. I mean, that will go down as the best example of if there's any doubt, even if it's a high level player, you have to cut your losses and you have to get some prospects and some assets. So certainly, all these teams are in the same boat. Columbus is the one exception where Columbus is really a legitimate contender with a great defense, great forward group, some nice prospects, and an elite goalie. So that's the one that's really intriguing to me. I could see them holding on to Panarin, but Montreal for sure. I mean, if they're not negotiating a contract, and same with Ottawa, it seems like it's a matter of when for those two, for sure this offseason.
Now with the Montreal Canadiens, Pacioretty is 99.9%, out the door basically, according to the Athletic, of course. The Canadiens are not gonna make playoffs. That's not a hot take. Looking at their roster. Even with Pacioretty, they're not making anything. Minus Pacioretty is gonna be even worse. Carey Price had a down year last year. Now he's coming back. He had time to recuperate. He had a long off season to kind of get back in the grind and get back to where he knows how to play. But Carey Price still one of the best goalies ever. I think he's too good for the Montreal Canadiens. Now, I love Carey Price. I know Montreal adores Carey Price. But thinking long term for Montreal, because Carey Price is not going to let the Canadiens fall to worst overall in the league. They're not going to lose. He's not going to let the team lose for Hughes. Do you, in this situation, now Carey Price doesn't have the greatest contract in terms of movability. He does have a no move clause on his contract, $10.5 million cap hit until 2026. So you need it. If he's gonna move, which it probably won't, but if he does, he's gonna have to sign off on it, and his contract isn't that cap friendly. Do you think that it makes more sense for Montreal to move him while they have a potential to get a generational player like Hughes, or do they keep him and play him and try to make the playoffs and like this quasi retool on the fly thing? What's the plan for Montreal?
I mean, it's like I said with Pacioretty, it's a shame. I mean, there have been so many questionable moves in the past 2-3 years for this team, in terms of their trades, the Subban trade, the Sergachev trade, the Galchenyuk trade, even. So, I mean, I would love to see where this team would have been if they still had those three players. Sergachev entering his second season, Subban being an elite scoring defenseman, Galchenyuk being a work in progress that I think is going to work out really well for the Coyotes this season, who could be much improved. But yeah, Carey Price right now, they're at a crossroads. They have to figure out, is Marc Bergevin their GM of the future? I mean, there have been some questionable moves. I'm not sure what more it's going to take to put the pressure on that team and that organization. I mean, Marc Bergevin has been there for a while. He helped build the team with Price, signed Price long term, which was a great move. But a lot of the bad moves have outweighed that. So Carey Price still in his prime, 30, 8 years left, 10.5, making crazy money for a goalie. So do I think he's going to get traded? I would say no. But I mean, anything's on the table here. But certainly it would be a shame if he was traded because that's really all that Montreal has right now. I mean, if they built even a middle of the road offense defense team, Carey Price could get them deep into the playoffs. Like you mentioned, one of the best individual goalies of the generation. So to me, I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's pure speculation. But that said, with your speculation and some of the reasons you mentioned, you make some really great points in terms of why he might waive a no movement clause potentially if they put that sort of thing on the table. So I mean, you look at the goalies around the league, there are a lot since the expansion draft, a lot of these situations have solidified themselves. You saw only three teams really, four teams if you include the Avalanche and the other three who made some moves in free agency. Buffalo got Hutton, uh, the Islanders got Lehner, and the Hurricanes got Mrazek. Those are really the only four teams with major goaltending question marks. Maybe you count in Ottawa, who has Craig Anderson near the end of his contract. So five teams out of 31. I mean, every other goaltending situation pretty much is solidified right now. So, or at least has two options. So, it would be interesting, but I'm not sure that that's actually going to happen anytime soon.
I have a dark horse team in my head, and tell me how crazy I am in a second here, and I probably am out of my mind. But the Carolina Hurricanes signed Mrazek to a 1 year deal, which is fairly it's not too bad. Could be a whole lot worse. They have almost $13 million in cap space. They got a lot better this offseason. They signed DeHaan, they signed TVR, they signed, a couple of minor league guys and Greg McKegg and whatnot. There's been chatter going around that, first of all, the Skinner trade, he's a name that has been rumored for a while that he's going to get traded. Justin Falk now, while he's an amazing defenseman, he's kind of moved down the lineup because they're so stacked on the blue line. Would Carolina potentially look at maybe a Falk, Skinner, and I don't know, name your, insert first round pick here, maybe plus, to Montreal to get Carey Price and really make that push for the playoffs? Because they've been in that 9-12 bubble. This could, this is obviously a fantasy, but could there be a shred of reality that Carolina just goes for it and does something ridiculous like this to solidify themselves as not only a playoff team but a solid contender for the playoffs?
Yeah, that team's on the cusp of doing something special. We've known it for a couple of years. I don't know that something like this trade proposal could ever uh, come about. I mean, certainly, I think if the other end was okay with it, I think certainly they would do something like that, Carolina, because Carolina's seems to be actively shopping at least Jeff Skinner with Justin Falk declining last season. I think he only had 12 or 13 even strength points, fifth on the team last year. So he did most of his damage on the power play. They got Dougie Hamilton, who's a top 15 even strength defenseman, top 10 even. I'm sorry, in even strength scoring over the past three seasons for Dougie Hamilton. So I think he's an underrated defenseman in this league, elite, whether you're talking about fantasy. Carolina has a great top line. They got Svechnikov in the draft. Valentin Zikov is underrated. He's going to be a rookie, Calder eligible rookie this coming season. So he could latch on with Sebastian Aho and Teuvo Teravainen. So they're really looking up. They're maybe one piece away from being a legitimate cup contender, even though they're on the on that playoff bubble, like you mentioned. But I mean, clearly they need a goalie, and they're taking a flyer on Peter Mrazek, but that is not most likely not going to be a long-term solution for the Hurricanes because of his inconsistency that he's shown in his career. So I'm sure that would be another team that would be in the market. You know, that was one of the 5 teams I mentioned that would be looking for a full-time, legitimate number one starter. So clearly they would be in that type of conversation. And they would benefit from any big splash really on the trade front because they've been very active this offseason. They've made a coaching change to Rod Brindamore from Bill Peters, and that market needs a spark. It's probably not going to be Carey Price, but I mean that market clearly needs a spark to get back to their glory days. 2006. I mean, that was a tough place to play. It was a rowdy fan base, and I'd like to see it get back to that standing one day.
Absolutely. I mean, again, the Carey Price thing is a brainchild that I've mulled over.
Of course.
It's an NHL 18 like trade. It's something that you probably won't see in reality often, if not much at all. But at the end of the day, on paper it makes sense, but in reality, probably not. But crazier things like if Gretzky got traded, the old trope of if Gretzky got traded, anybody can be moved. But one player that did get moved today was Marian Hossa, who retired last season. But he still has a contract for the next few seasons. He got traded to the Arizona Coyotes along with Vinny Hinostroza, Jordan Osterley, and a third-round pick next year for Marcus Kruger, so he's going back to Chicago. Mackenzie Entwistle, Jordan Maleta, Andrew Campbell, and a fifth-round pick next year. Mackenzie Entwistle, by the way, third-round pick in the last draft, in the 2017 draft, who put up 38 points in the OHL in 49 games. I mean, as a third-round pick, he should be getting a point a game in the juniors. As history has shown us, junior players in the juniors should, at the very least, be getting a point a game to make a dent in the NHL. And for Mackenzie Entwistle, who is only 18, he's going to be 19 in 2 days. So happy early birthday to Mackenzie Entwistle. But he should be stepping up a little bit more. He did get 17 points in 21 playoff games this past playoff, so that's good. But for someone that needs to make a dent in the NHL, I think Mackenzie Entwistle needs to step it up a little bit. But Pete, what do you think about this trade? Because this could have been a lot simpler. Because Arizona loves to acquire these bad contracts in exchange for not a whole lot and get a prospector pick in return. But in this case, they got a bad contract, and they got Hinostroza, who's good, Osterley, who's decent, and a third-round pick for Kruger, who Chicago loves, and Entwistle, who right now is a question mark, Maleta, who's 23 years old, who hasn't really been making a splash, Campbell, who's 30 years old, as a career AHLer, and a fifth-round pick. Pete, what do you think about this trade?
I mean, I think it makes Arizona is a team coming into the year that has solidified its key players. I mean, they have still Clayton Keller on the entry-level contract. They re-signed Oliver Ekman-Larsson for an 8-year extension, and they re-signed Antti Ranta for 3 more years. So that getting Ranta and OEL to sign on for multiple seasons exceeds my expectation of them. I thought that one or both of them could have gotten traded, but they've sold them on stability, and that's great for the Coyotes. Now, after that happened, I mean, actually, technically before OEL happened, but right in that same time frame was when the Galchenyuk trade happened. So that trade really helped Arizona's secondary scoring. And I think that these two players, Hinostroza and Osterley, who you mentioned, are going to the Coyotes from the Blackhawks. They're both players that, for Chicago last season, I mean, it was a bad year, but those are guys that can contribute in secondary roles here and now and make this Coyotes team even more dangerous They're already a team with I think, an underrated defense between Goligoski, Jalmerson, Chikrin, when healthy, is still very, very young and talented and has a higher ceiling. And OEL, who I mentioned, strong goaltender in Ranta, who you know from his Ranger days, and very quietly had a 930 save percentage last year for a bottom five team. I'm not even sure how that's possible. So I really like this trade, case in point, for the Coyotes and their chances of contending now. And Whistle, who you mentioned, was an unsigned draft pick, so maybe he didn't want to sign with the Coyotes. So clearly, he would probably sign on with the Blackhawks. So that's maybe why this trade got a little more complicated. But for the Blackhawks, it frees up some salary. So, hey, if they want to take a chance on Max Pacioretty, and give up a couple of key players to the Canadians, to help their rebuild, and get a guy on the cheap that can contribute 35 goals if he's playing with Jonathan Toews. I mean, that's the reason why Chicago wanted to get rid of that salary, is because they have to get competitive again. They've won 3 Stanley Cups in the past decade, but they are really falling victim to the salary cap right now. They needed to shed that salary of Hossa, and they were able to do so, parting ways with a couple of players. But I kind of like this trade for both sides. I mean, clearly, the Coyotes benefit benefit more, though, I would say, getting secondary players who can help them contend this coming season.
Well, the Blackhawks have now, according to Cap Friendly, $9.3 million in cap space, but it's tough to make a huge move for a guy like Pacioretty, especially long term, because they have Patrick Kane at $10.5 million, because they have Jonathan Toews, who, leadership and, off the ice stuff, you can't measure that, but $10.5 million for Jonathan Toews is way too much money. Then you have Brent Seabrook, who's 33, getting $6.875 million until 2024. Duncan Keith, who's 34, getting $5.538 until 2023. I mean, they have these huge contracts in guys that aren't getting any younger. So I'm not sold on if Chicago were to get Max Pacioretty for whatever that deal would include. I'm not sure if that's enough to save them.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it might be a short-term thing, and that's how they've been rolling the past couple of years. They got 2 great seasons from Panarin. They had to part ways. I mean, they've traded some solid players over the past 2, 3 seasons, and even dating back to Nick Leddy. I mean, they kind of gave Nick Leddy to the Islanders. That was a cap casualty. I mean, he had a bad year for a terrible Islanders defense last year, but Nick Leddy's a really strong defenseman. I think he'll bounce back this season, and that's just another example of how this Blackhawks team has had to operate because of those 2 massive contracts. And even, I mean, yeah, the Keith one is bad. He had a down year last year. I think he still has some bounce back potential. The Seabrook one is much worse, and Corey Crawford, even as good as he is when healthy, he is, expected to be ready for training camp. They hope he'll be ready for training camp, but they have a lot of money invested for the next 2 seasons to Corey Crawford as well, who has a number of injury concerns, especially with that murky situation from last year where he was kind of, ruled out at different points in the season and just was a major question mark. He had an elite start to the season. That's the shame about it. But as a big question mark moving forward. So I think that if they were able to get a Pacioretty, have a healthy Corey Crawford, bounce back season from Duncan Keith, and Brandon Saad, who 2 years ago was top 15 in even strength points, it could come together very quickly, especially if, DeBrincat played with Patrick Kane in the World Championships. If that duo becomes a thing, then all of a sudden the Blackhawks could be back in contention, even without a Pacioretty. So I would not be surprised if they took a flyer on him, even if they had to give up a piece or two in return.
They have Corey Crawford for $6 million until 2020. They gave Cam Ward a no move clause, which I mean, I don't understand it. I don't know if you understand it. I don't know if 20 I don't know if 30 out of the 31 NHL teams understand why Cam Ward got a no move clause. It's only a 1 year deal. $3 million though for a backup goalie. It sort of maybe makes sense because Crawford's health is in question. At the same time, that's bad. That's there's if you're looking to shave money off your cap, and you turn around and you sign a 34-year-old goalie to a $3 million deal. I don't know if even if Brandon Saad does play better, which I'm almost positive that he will. Marcus Kruger isn't going to add that offensive punch that the Blackhawks needed last year. Alex DeBrincat's going to be great. They added Chris Kunitz. What is he going to do? The guy's 38 years old, and he used to be a solid player, but I mean, he was a 13th forward at best in Tampa Bay, and that team was a powerhouse. I don't know what they expect from him in Chicago, but the top six is looking decent for Chicago with Kane and Taves and Saad and Anisimov and DeBrincat and maybe even Nick Schmaltz. But after that, it trails off like a steep, steep mountain.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you look at their cap friendly, they're pretty. I mean, they have a couple of really long-term deals: Kane, Taves, Seabrook, Keith. Crawford's a little bit shorter, but yeah, you look at that. Those are the type of moves they're forced to make in free agency. Where, I mean, I'm not sure that Cam Ward had a ton of offers around the league, but maybe some. I mean, guys like Halak were being signed. You know, there were some serviceable backups that were picked up. So yeah, Cam Ward, maybe they had to. I would have thought they would be able to get him for a little cheaper than $3 million, but. I guess that's where they stand. I mean, this is a championship caliber team that's trying to make ends meet with some of these low budget moves around their core players. So it's a tricky situation. We can't sit here and say that it's easy, that they should be making better moves. They don't have a lot to work with. That said, Chris Kunitz and Cam Ward, I'm not sure what they can really bring to the table. Even if Crawford is not, misses a large chunk of the season, is Cam Ward really with that defense? The best players on that defense being in the twilight of their careers, and Seabrook and Keith. Is Cam Ward really going to do the job? I guess we'll find out, but I don't have much confidence in Cam Ward, and I haven't for many years. I was surprised that he stuck around so long in Carolina. They were very loyal to him. He brought them the cup as a rookie, so maybe he deserved that. But yeah, Cam Ward, Chris Kunitz, not really gonna make or break your season, no matter what happens around. So I do think that Nick Schmaltz, who's a 2019 RFA, and DeBrincat are really nice pieces. I mean, hopefully they can figure something out by the time they have to sign DeBrincat 2 years from now, where they won't have to trade him too. But this is it's a tough situation for Chicago, and all the teams around them are getting better. I mean, Dallas got better, Colorado got better. Winnipeg is an elite team in that division. Minnesota's still hanging around there. So there's so much going on in each division and so many improvements around. This is really showing, a team, as much as you can look at like the Tavares thing and how the Islanders would love to still have him right now. You can make the argument that unless you've already won and you can reward the players who deserve it, it's not always the best, strategy to lock multiple players up to 10+ million contracts. I mean, it doesn't work once those guys are making that much. You can't build a championship contender around those guys anymore.
Right. Even looking at a guy like Marian Hossa, right, who signed a ridiculous 12-year contract with Chicago in 2009. I mean, at the time, Marian Hossa is a phenomenal player, but 12 years, that's a little much. But I mean, speaking of players like Cam Ward and like Peter Mrazek and Chris Kunitz, which player besides John Tavares, because he's the obvious number one choice here, is going to fit in the best with their new team? Now, it might not be, who's going to score the most points, who's going to do the best in one area, but who's overall going to contribute the most with their new team? It could be Mrazek, I guess, in Carolina. He could surprise people. It could be Calvin DeHaan in Carolina, shutting down the blue line entirely. Who is your biggest name that's gonna do a lot of good for their new team?
I think JVR is going to be really good with the Flyers. I know he's been there before, but I think that top six is as good as any in the NHL right now, and they're going to have they've been known for being a team with an elite first power play unit with Giroux, Voracek, Simmons, Gostisbehere, guys like that. I mean, they have so much talent now that it's going to spill over to the second power play unit where Provorov plays, and Provorov very quietly, young player, really battled for them in the playoffs through injury, played very well, and is an amazing piece for them to have with all their other prospects moving forward. I think that Provorov, who he was tied for the NHL lead among defensemen in goals very quietly this past year. I mean, you're going to look at Provorov playing with a Konechny, Nolan Patrick, and one of the others, maybe JVR, maybe Simmons, second power play. I mean, that's a really strong second power play. I think the Flyers are going to be dangerous. The same concern exists with their goaltending, but they do have, this is one different thing this year. They have Carter Hart and they have Alex Lyon. They have two young goalies. I would say right now, one of those two are going to pan out, and that's great news for this team because now, with the Eagles winning, Sixers competitive again,
Right.
this city needs that team to turn it around. I think the Flyers are very close to making a deep run. I was talking about the Jackets too. I think the Flyers in that same division with JVR could take that next step this season. Yeah, so and I mean that team arguably deserved to beat the Penguins in the first round this year. A lot of people forget about that. They won two road games against the back-to-back defending Cup champs. And they got a couple of calls that didn't go their way in Game 6. So I think JVR was a guy that scored 36 goals this past year, playing on the third line for Toronto. So I think he has 40 goal potential. Certainly the potential to score 30, 35 in that loaded offense for Philly.
Well, they lost Val Filppula, so throw all Cup hopes out the window. I mean, their top six is dominant. They have Giroux, Couturier, Konechny, JVR, Nolan Patrick, and Voracek. That's a sensational top six. Their defensive pairing, a little bit to be desired. They have Provorov, they have Gostisbehere, which is a great top two, top four pairing, sensational pairing. Sanheim and Hag could be a good top four pairing. McDonald and Gudas, I mean less so, but if you play them bottom 6 minutes, maybe they'll be okay. How big is the goaltending leash for Brian Elliott and Michael Norvith? Because like you said, they have two up-and-coming goaltenders that are knocking at the door, hoping to get their next shot at being the Flyers goaltender. So if Elliott has a bad start, if Neuwirth has a bad start, what are the chances that one of them gets moved or sent down or benched or whatever or what have you, and Lyon or one of them gets called up and becomes the semi-permanent / permanent backup or starter?
Yeah, I mean, Brian Elliott's been streaky in his career, has had some great moments, but also some very bad moments lately with the Flyers and with the Flames 2 years ago. Neuwirth also great playoff moments at certain points, but also inconsistent goalie. So I would say right now, gut feeling, one of those two will struggle out of the gate and probably get waived because they're both in UFA pending seasons. So there's not much to cut loose to cut your losses if you're the Flyers, especially to give one of those younger guys, Carter Hart or Alex Lyon, a chance to emerge as the full-time starter and have a capable backup in whichever other goalie, Elliott or Neuwirth, sticks on the roster. So they got Mrazek out of the picture. I mean, they didn't give him the qualifying offer, became a UFA and went to Carolina. So they cut their losses with him. And I think they're willing to do the same with either Elliott or Neuwirth if it doesn't go well to start the season. I mean, both of those guys are inconsistent, but together there's still the potential that those two guys could help you field a competitive playoff team. They've done it before. So, yeah, I think that the leash is short, no doubt, for Elliott and Neuwirth with those two prospects waiting in the wing.
I absolutely agree with what you had to say, and especially in terms of JVR, I really think that he moves Wayne Simmonds down to top 9, but I think Simmonds is a power play expert anyway. And Wayne Simmonds, I think, would benefit from playing on the third line because he didn't really play as well as he usually does 5-on-5 this year. And I think adding JVR now kind of alleviates some of that pressure that Simmonds may or may not have felt. It seemed that way this year that during even strength he didn't play as well as he probably could have, but during on the power play, of course, Wayne Simmonds is still Wayne Simmonds, so he might Wayne Simmonds blossomed anyway, but he might blossom from this role of being this third line, quote unquote third line, but at the same time third line power winger that could potentially wreak havoc on other teams as bottom 6.
Yeah, the thing with Wayne Simmonds and I agree, his production was nowhere near what it's been in years past. He was dealing with multiple injuries, though, so I cut him a little bit of a break there. He's a 2019 UFA. I expect Wayne Simmonds to have a huge year this year. And the Flyers have options. They have Lindblom, who they could play in the top 9, Nolan Patrick, second line center, most likely. Travis Konechny, very quietly, I think he was a top 50 even strength scorer in the NHL, forwards and defensemen, which is not too shabby. And, Raffles, decent in stretches as well. So I think that top 9 is in really good shape. Simmonds could definitely fill that third line role, maybe with Konechny, and then play on the first power play unit. I think they could also load up the top 2 lines. They could go Giroux, Couturier, Voracek, or Simmonds, and then have the other one play with Patrick and JVR. I mean, what a great top 2 lines that would be. So, yeah, I think that Simmonds will have a great contract year. Maybe will price himself out of Philly, but Philly has a chance to make a nice little run here and exceed expectations. They're flying under the radar. Nobody's really talking about them, but they made a big investment in JVR, who's a quality goal scorer, and I think it'll pay off this year.
You're absolutely right. You know what? I really didn't think of the Flyers as a potential deep playoff team, but you are absolutely on the mark. Their top 6, potentially top 9, is very dangerous. The only question mark is their goaltending, but that could be solved sooner rather than later. I think a name that people might discredit is Ilya Kovalchuk. This guy, he's 35. So he's not the superstar that the Thrashers once had, but he's still a dominant scorer. The LA Kings couldn't score if their life depended on it in the playoffs, and that really bit them in a place where they shouldn't be bit. They got swept by the Knights, which is a whole different can of worms. The Golden Knights were what a story that was. But I mean, Ilya Kovalchuk brings scoring to the Kings. Now, a lot of their players had down years, but Ilya Kovalchuk is still a great scorer. Is he going to score 52 goals like he did in Atlanta? Probably not. But is he going to score 25, 30? He very well might. So I think this signing, although the contract is a little bit, it's not too great. It's a little pricey, but at the end of the day, Ilya Kovalchuk, I think, adds a unique layer to the Kings that they've been missing, and I think a lot of teams in the early onset of the season might kind of take for granted. Ilya Kovalchuk is 35, like I said. He's not going to be that 52 goal scorer, but he's still going to be a sniper. He hasn't lost that shot. It didn't go anywhere. He might have lost a step, but he's still a dynamic scorer that the Kings are going to benefit from.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think and the thing is with him, he was technically a UFA, but he had already committed to the Kings prior to, that draft weekend. He committed to the Kings. So, I mean, yeah, if you're talking about UFAs that have joined new teams, he was a commodity. I mean, you could talk about the risks surrounding that guy, whether it's his skating ability in the modern NHL, his age, he's 35. He left the Devils, in bad shape. He kind of cut the cord with them, had a long-term deal with them. He bailed on the Devils. I mean, people don't forget about that. So when the negativity with Kovalchuk, that's where it comes from. It comes from his age, the concerns on the ice, and also, his commitment to the team. But I think this is a nice short-term deal for the Kings. I think that with Kopitar, anything is possible. Even Jeff Carter. Jeff Carter had such an amazing season 2 years ago and was cut short with that leg injury this past year, was limited, still was almost a point a game in 20-something games. But I think this is the best wing that the Kings have had in a long time. I mean, I think that Ilya Kovalchuk is a lock for 25, 30 goals and 55, 60 points, a lock for that. So talk about a higher ceiling. 70 points is realistic. 35 goals is realistic. Kopitar resurrected Dustin Brown's career last year. That guy was being talked about being bought out for many years for the Kings. And he went out and scored 60 points last year on a line with Kopitar and 15 on the power play or so. So, integrate Kovalchuk into the first power play unit with Doughty, Carter, Kopitar, maybe Toffoli or Dustin Brown, and you have a nice little offense there. I really like the move for the Kings standpoint, and I think that even with all those risks that I said, I think it's a no-brainer. I mean, this guy was a commodity. A lot of teams around the league wanted him, and you were able to get him for nothing more than money. You didn't have to give up any assets. So what a plus that is for LA. And Drew Doughty has signed a contract with them, pretty much going to be a King for the rest of his career. So I think it has done enough to convince him that this team is going to be competitive in the short and long term.
Unless he gets put on LTIR, in which case, hello Arizona, right? But I speaking of the Devils, I put out a poll on Twitter at Andrew Chelney. Which team is most likely to miss the playoffs in this upcoming season after being in it last year? And the 4 teams that I put in there were the Vegas Golden Knights, the Anaheim Ducks, the New Jersey Devils, and the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Knights had 25% of the vote. Over 330 people voted. 27% said the Ducks. The Devils led the poll with 35%, and the Blue Jackets lost the poll, which is good for Columbus with just 13%. Now, some of the comments that I had in response to that poll from @Blades_of_Steel, he said it has to be the Devils if you look at the division and just the overall talent that's in it, and at Drive45_ said, Devils have literally done nothing in free agency. Can't see them catching magic in a bottle and repeating last season. What do you think about that? Because that's certainly an interesting point. The Devils haven't really gotten better per se, but they haven't necessarily gotten worse. What's your expectation of the Devils for the upcoming season?
I think they're going to hang around. I mean, I think that Corey Schneider's injury is a concern. I know Keith Kincaid was great in limited action, but I don't know that Keith Kincaid can start you 50 plus games and and keep you in playoff contention. I mean, the Rangers and Islanders look like they're non-playoff teams, so it really comes down to Carolina, because I think right now, like I mentioned, Columbus, Philly, Pittsburgh, and Washington are all strong playoff contenders. So, I mean, the one thing that could throw this off is I think Florida is going to be much improved, as is Buffalo. I don't think Buffalo will make the playoffs just yet, but I would be very surprised if the Panthers didn't make the playoffs this year, even being in a tough division with Toronto, Tampa, and Boston. So playoff spots, it's not a default that the Metro will get 5 teams this year. I don't think it's going to happen. And yeah, I think the Devils will probably fall out of it. I did see one comment, though, on your tweet that was interesting from Minnesota. I mean, Minnesota hasn't done a ton this offseason. They're really banking on the health of Parise and Suter. They added Greg Panarin as a third pair defenseman. That was their biggest move. So they don't really have the health is the big concern for them. If they can get a bounce back year from like Nito Niederreiter, and they still have to sign Jason Zucker and Matt Dumba, so they still have work to do. But in terms of new blood for a team that's gotten eliminated 3 straight years in the first round, Minnesota is certainly at risk, and Bruce Boudreau is at risk of falling victim to the pressure. So that's a very tough division, and Minnesota, a team that could also fall out of it for sure. I don't think Vegas is going to fall out of the playoffs. There's been a lot of doom and gloom around them for some reason this offseason. I think it's a little exaggerated. I think that team is still going to be right there with teams like the Flames and the Oilers and even the Ducks. I'm not convinced. I think the Coyotes will be better, but I'm not convinced that Vegas will all of a sudden fall off the face of the earth.
Well, I said this last week on the show, but Vegas is one of those stories where literally every single thing had to go right for Vegas to get to where they were, to get to the playoffs, because Fleury was out for a chunk of the season, and you had 4th, 5th string goaltenders play like Marty Brodeur in his prime. You had Riley Smith play exceptionally well. You had William Karlsson out of seemingly nowhere just completely light up every team every night. You had Derek Englund, who never played that well in his career, get to Vegas and all of a sudden become a dependable top 4, top 6 defenseman. A lot of things had to go right for Vegas to make not only the final, but the playoffs in general, which personally, this is where you and me disagree a little bit. I can't possibly see a scenario in which Vegas duplicates that luck. Most of it obviously is skill, but some of it's luck. Some of their success hinged on luck, which is funny because they're in Vegas, and Vegas usually depends on luck for you to win. But they needed that that beginner's luck in Vegas to be as successful as they were. I'm not so sure they replicate that, but as you mentioned, at Fabio227 did make a great point. He said low-key could see Minnesota missing out with their aging core and the moves the Stars and the Blues made. Now, I totally agree. There's definitely a question mark in Minnesota because unless Parise and unless Niederreiter have career years, I mean, Dubnyk was good, but unless he plays to the level that he played when he first got to Minnesota, where nothing could go past him ever. It's like the guy just built a brick wall in the net and just kind of sat there because a puck can't break bricks. So unless he plays to that level, I'm not sure Minnesota makes it. But in terms of New Jersey, their top six is okay. They have Taylor Hall, who just won the MVP. Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt. Good Jesper Bratt. He's a good winger. I'm not so sure he's top line material. You have Mojo, Marcus Johansson, Travis Zajac, Kyle Palmieri, solid line. But then you kind of fall off. You have Blake Coleman, Zaka, and Noessen. Miles Wood, maybe Brian Boyle, maybe, and then question mark. I guess they lost Grabner, who didn't play well at all in New Jersey. They lost Brian Gibbons, who had a career year in New Jersey. Grabner signed with the Coyotes, and Gibbons signed a 1-year deal in Anaheim. They lost Jamie Hayes, who again was a disappointment in New Jersey. He signed with the Penguins. They lost John Moore, which is a big hole now in their blue line. John Moore, while not a top 2 defenseman, could be a dependable top 4, top 6 defenseman. And they also lost Pat Maroon to his hometown Blues. They didn't add anybody. Their biggest name, really, they didn't really do much in free agency, but they did lose a few interesting pieces. They had 97 points last season. I'm not so sure they can replicate that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one guy we should also mention is Butcher. Yeah, Butcher is, at least on the power play, has shown some flashes of brilliance. That said, I have concerns about his defensive ability, at least in the short term. So, yeah, I would say the Devils probably are knocking him. No disrespect to Hischier. I mean, one thing about Hischier and Hall, we should say, is that it's come out that those guys were both dealing with hand injuries. Hischier had ups and downs. 50-plus points, though, as a rookie, and Taylor Hall scoring 95 with like 37 on the power play. I mean, it's just unbelievable numbers. So that duo, you have to give that duo credit and think that if they're fully rehabbed and fully healthy, maybe even they have the chance to replicate that. So that's, I have some confidence in that duo, but I worry about the health of Palmieri because he was in and out of the lineup last year. Bratt, who you mentioned, was at his best when he was on the top line, not really when he was lower in the lineup. So those are concerns for the Devils, in addition to Schneider's injury, which we mentioned. And one thing about Vegas that I forgot to mention, my only concern with them is they lost 110 points combined in James Neal and David Perron. I mean, they're veteran guys. Who knows if they would have replicated that, especially Perron again. He tailed off in the playoffs. But, I mean, that's a big loss. 2 of your top 6 forwards, 2 of your 4 top 6 wings are no longer with the team. So they're expecting a lot from Alex Tuck. And they don't really have much else on the wing in terms of secondary scorers besides, Marchessault and Riley Smith. So, the concerns are there secondary scoring wise for Vegas. I just think their defense is pretty strong. And I think their goaltender, when healthy, is also good enough to get them back to the playoffs.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, Marchessault is still going to be Marchessault. He's going to be a great player. I'm not sure if he can replicate the season that he had. William Karlsson, I doubt he's going to repeat what he had last year.
The shooting percentage is going down, right?
Absolutely. He's not going to score as many goals. He's still going to be a good player. He's not going to have as many goals or points as he had last season. Riley Smith going to have a good year. The question marks that I have are now on the second line because you look at what they have after that. They have Eric Haula, who's going to be good, but he's not going to be a dependable scorer. Then you have Paul Stastny, who was terrific in Winnipeg. I don't really know why he left. He was a great fit in Winnipeg. Went to Vegas, and Tomas Tatar, who was a disgrace in the playoffs. Just you can't trade a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and a third-round pick for a player and then bench him in the playoffs. That's disgraceful. That can't happen. Then they have Daniel Carr, Cody Eakin, Alex Tuck. the biggest question mark, and they also signed, Rangers legend Nick Holden. I'm not sure about their depth scoring. Marchessault can score, Smith can score, Carlson isn't going to score that much. Scoring might be an issue for him.
Yeah, it could easily be an issue. I mean, they did get Paul Stastny, but they run into that problem now. I mean, they just spent a lot for Stastny. They probably outbid some other teams that could have used them, like probably the Islanders, for one. But I mean, certainly with Stastny and Haula, both centers. I mean, maybe Haula moves to the wing and plays with Tuck and Stastny, but they probably go with those three deep up the middle, and then that gives you a problem where you have some strong center depth, but you really have some problems on the wing. So yeah, that's definitely the biggest concern for Vegas in their second season.
Absolutely. I mean, this has been fantastic. I've loved every second of this conversation. It's truly been a blast. P, you are the best. I really, really, really mean it when I say I appreciate it so much that you've taken time out and joined me on the show. It means a lot, and your takes, sometimes hot, especially with Vegas. Again, it just means a lot that you would take time out, and it means a lot to have you on the show.
Oh, thanks so much, man. And I'm happy to be a part of it and keep up the good work. You're a rising star in the industry. It was a pleasure working with you when you were an intern last year, and keep up the good work, man. You're doing the right things, with the podcast and everything. Looking forward to seeing where it is maybe a year from now. Could be doing crazy things. So keep it up.
Fingers crossed, man. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. By the way, if for those that are still with us, if you rate the show, if you give a comment to the show, a puppy gets a hug from its owner and also gets a treat. It's a fact. I don't make the rules. It's just I'm spreading the knowledge here. If you give the show a follow, a subscribe on iTunes, a follow on SoundCloud, wherever you're listening, if you subscribe, if you give us a rating, puppies are happy all around, and I'm happy as well. And the show, every time we get a listen, it puts a smile on my face because someone out there is enjoying the stuff that I put out, and the people that come on the show are just amazing, that given their time devoted to spit their hot takes and their awesome knowledge about hockey and everything else. So puppies are happy, I'm happy, Pete's happy, Brandon's happy, Julian's happy, and of course Brian is happy as well. When you rate the show, when you subscribe to the show and all that great stuff, share the show, much appreciated. But for now, Pete, I will talk to you again very soon. Once again, you are the best, and I really appreciate that you came on.
Yeah, we got to get you playing some fantasy hockey this year for the regular season, and yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Thanks again, man.
Absolutely.
See you soon.
Let me know when that starts. I didn't play last year. I didn't have a league. I need a league this year. I need to be a part of people. I need to be a part of a league that that people that not only follow hockey, but people that could probably destroy me in fantasy like you, because on top of you being Pete Jensen, you are a fantasy connoisseur, and you can easily wreck me in fantasy, and I would want nothing more than to watch you wreck me in fantasy hockey. So yes, please. Fantasy hockey is something that I dabbled in the past, took a hiatus from, and I would love to get back into this year. So let me know for sure.
Yeah, you got it, man. It's a plan, and we'll talk soon. Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pete. And for those that are listening, thank you so much, and I will talk to you again next week.